Factors that facilitated the acquisition of slaves. A. Existence of the institution of slavery in West Africa, where the war captives, adulterers, witches, the weak, debtors and murderers were enslaved. B. Availability of firearms to precipitate warfare and capture of the conquered as slaves. C. Existence of well-defined trade routes easily used by the slave merchants to access the interior slave markets. D. The great demand for slaves in the New World, Latin America and North America. Ways of obtaining slaves. A. Selling of domestic slaves in exchange for goods like beads, guns, glass, etc. B. Selling of criminals, debtors and social misfits in society by the local chiefs to the Arab slave traders. C. Prisoners of war could be sold off. D. Porters were sometimes kidnapped, transported and sold off to the Arab traders. E. Raiding villages. This would begin at night with gunshots and people would scatter, consequently leading to their capture. F. Through intertribal wars many Africans become destitutes and these would be captured by the slave traders. G. Tax offenders were sold off by the African chiefs. H. They were also captured through ambushes during hunting, traveling and gardening. I. Slaves would be acquired from the main slave trade market in Zanzibar. J. Other Africans are also said to have gone voluntarily in anticipation of great wonders and benefits from the New World. Following capture, slaves were force-marched to the coast to holding pens where they were oiled and fed ready for inspection, before being loaded on ships. Prices of slaves depended on sex, age and size. The slaves were bartered for guns, alcohol, gunpowder, cloth and different metals. 2 trading systems were used. A factory system where political authorities allowed Europeans to establish permanent coastal barracoons or fortresses where slaves were kept in bulk as they awaited shipment. This method was only used by chartered companies as tea was expensive. It was also only viable in Dahomey where slaves were in large numbers. B. Private trading, sailing with vessels down the coast, and then stopping at different points to purchase slaves until there was enough cargo. The slaves were branded before loading them into the ships ready for the transatlantic journey, which was called the Middle Passage. The ships were filthy, hot, and crowded. By 1654, some 8,000–10,000 Africans each year were undergoing the Middle Passage. Dangers of Middle Passage. Suicide disease. The mortality rate averaged between 13 and 33% of the slaves and the crew. If the Atlantic were to dry up, it would reveal a scattered pathway of human bones marking the various routes of the Middle Passage. The Attic. Many Africans revolted during the Middle Passage in a bid to escape. For some, jumping overboard was more preferable than the blood being turned into red wine, bones into gunpowder, skins into black leather shoes and flesh the white man's meat, as they believed. Factors which led to the development of the transatlantic slave trade. An increased demand for slave labor by European countries led them to West Africa, where they were available in large numbers. B. Greater preference for African slaves by the slave traders, since they were thought to be more strong and resistant to tropical disease and could cope with stress easily. C. West Africa had well-defined interior routes which enabled establishment of earlier strong trade links by the Europeans. There were also vast trade goods like gold, palm oil and ivory. This stimulated the development of transatlantic trade. D. African chiefs had developed a taste for European goods like cloths, firearms and glass, enabling exchange for slaves, gold, ivory and palm oil. There was also existence of the institution of slavery in West African communities. E. The introduction of firearms facilitated the capture of slaves and hence their increased supply. F. The exploitation of minerals and establishment of plantations in the Americas pushed demand for slaves to higher levels, hence trade with the region expanded. G. The increased demand for raw materials to feed the growing industries in Europe led to increased demand for slaves in cotton farms in the Americas. H. The rivalry between the Portuguese and the Spaniards and with the Britons over the control of slave trade pushed the trade to a higher new level. I. The fact the trade was very lucrative led to its further expansion. J. Improved technology which meant ability to construct greater capacity ships. This enhanced transportation of more slaves from West Africa and thus development of the trade. Impact of transatlantic trade on the people of West Africa. It caused immense suffering to many people. B. It led to forced emigration of about 10 million people to the Americas between 1500 and 1888. C. Many slaves died between capture and arrival to their destinations. D. Depopulation occurred in areas where slaves were taken from. This led to development since the young and productive people were taken away. E. African traditional industries were destroyed by the sale of cheap manufactured goods from Europe. F. There was increased conflict between communities, especially where the gun was used. This led to destruction of property during the inter-community wars. G. Many African communities were weakened and were left unprepared for the scramble and partition of Africa which soon followed. H. It led to rise and growth of states, e.g. Asante, Dahomey. I. It led to founding of Liberia and Sierra Leone as settlements for slaves who were freed. J. It led to changes to social roles. Women became the heads of their families due to the enslavement of men. K. Some African cultures spread to the Americas, e.g. jazz music and samba dancing styles of Brazil and even witchcraft. L. The trade led to the rise of the mulatto population, e.g. in Senegal, where they are mainly found in Gori and Dakar, as a result of the intermingling between the European traders and the African women. M. It contributed to the decline of the trans-Saharan trade and the colonization of West Africa.